Welcome to Innovators and Creators, a conversation about writing. I am Sean Fry, Assistant Director of the Boone County Public Library, and today I'm talking with Patricia McLinn, who is a USA Today bestselling author. She's been cited by reviewers for her warmth, wit, and vivid characterization. She's won numerous regional and national awards. In addition to her romance and women's fiction books, she is the author of Caught Dead in Wyoming mystery series, which adds a touch of humor and romance to figuring out whodunit. Patricia's received a BA and MSJ degree from Northwestern University. She was a sports writer, assistant sports editor, and for 20 plus years an editor at the Washington Post. She has spoken about writing from Melbourne, Australia to Washington, D.C., and now Burlington, Kentucky. She's now living in Northern Kentucky and writing full-time. In our conversation today, we discuss what Patricia is currently reading, her writing process, advice to new authors, and her own experience of working in a library. Thank you for joining us and enjoy. Why don't you tell us about your podcast?
Okay, I started a podcast called Authors Love Readers, and it is for readers. I'm interviewing, at the start, my buddies, because I figured that if I messed up the technology, they not only had to forgive me, they had to redo the show. So I'm starting off with a lot of buddies, and I hope to have a diversity of genres and backgrounds. It doesn't matter to me whether they're traditionally published, indie published, hybrid, some other publishing venue that I haven't thought of yet. I just want to hear about their process and to be the designated question asker. So I've got some questions from readers and I'm asking for more, always asking for more. You can send questions to podcast@authorslovereaders.com. And it is a conversation. It's an hour-long conversation about how they write, where the stories come from, what do they do with an idea once they have one? Because most authors will tell you, we got plenty of ideas. That's not an issue. It's the actual transferring from the idea to a book that is the difficulty.
Now, sitting down and you're doing a podcast, are you starting to even learn more about your own writing process through these questions and these podcasts?
I'm recognizing mine is very strange.
Okay.
I already knew that, but it's bringing that out more. I don't write.
So what is your writing process?
Well, I write out of sequence.
Okay. I
don't start at the beginning of the book and go to the end. Usually a story comes to me, well, I hear voices, with people arguing. There's some conflict. These people are butting heads for some reason. I don't know their names. I'll have some view of who they are. It's I liken it to eavesdropping on a couple in a restaurant, and you can gather a lot of what came before, and you can start to glimpse of what might happen afterwards, but you're just seeing this little segment. And that's how the stories start for me. Then I have to do the work before and after to figure it out.
So you start researching after your voice is in your head?
Yeah, well, researching some with it, whatever the background of the story is, but also just feeling out who those characters are. And I'm not, they don't have names, usually. I do a lot of he and she for quite a while because I've discovered if I name people the wrong thing, it stops me dead. I am stopped in my tracks. So I have to be very careful about naming the characters, knowing who they are before I name them. I know this all sounds very strange.
No, but so how long are you into writing before you decide to give birth, to give a name to these characters?
A lot of times my process, this first kind of just writing into the mists, is at least a third of the book. Not necessarily the first third,
right,
because it's bits and pieces here and there, but it's what the characters are giving to me, and usually that's just going. I'm just writing day after day after day, and then I hit a spot where I've sort of outrun my headlights. I can't see what's going on. I don't have any more scenes in my head, so I have this mess. Of, 30,000 words, something like that. And then I have to go back and look at that and see what else is there that I'd missed. And there's usually a lot. that came through unconsciously or subconsciously. And it's usually at that point that I'm figuring out what their names are. Once in a while, they're really nice and they tell me their names earlier than that. But
so you mentioned what you missed. Do you mean when you say miss, like details that you need to flush out, or?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Because and I talk about writing through the mist.
Mm-hmm.
I think of it like if you look across a field and there's fog between you and the horizon, but certain things are really clear, so startling clear. So I'll know the male protagonist has a dog named Spot who has no spots. And that has got to be, whatever else changes, he could change his profession, he could change, his backstory, but he has got to have that dog named Spot with no spots. It's just, it's part of how I feel the story. And as I'm saying this, I know how strange it sounds. So.
It's your process.
It
works
is.
for you. I mean,
and that's one of the things, that's something I think I have learned more in working on the podcast, is respecting your process. I've always felt it was important, but even more so, that as you write and as you learn how the stories will come for you, you have to respect that. And a lot of times authors have a lot of information coming at them about do it this way, this will be better. I cannot tell you how many people have told me I need to outline. And I've tried, and I've lost entire books that way because I have one of those rabbit minds that when I have outlined the story, my mind says, that one's done, let's go do something else. So I never get from the outline to a finished book.
So did it take you a while to kind of learn to respect your own process?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And I have had backslidings. When I started writing mysteries, I thought, well, okay, now I have to be organized. Now I have to outline. I absolutely have to do this. I have to do it the way all the to-do books say. And I wasn't doing them. I just wasn't writing them. And I finally said, oh, okay. I can either not write by trying to do it their way, or I can try writing my way. And so now I do the mysteries the same way I've done all the other books.
So what made you want to write a mystery then?
I really enjoy reading them. I like them a lot. My academic background, I did a lot of the classics. And I did not read mysteries until a friend from graduate school introduced them to me after we graduated. Thank goodness, or I'm not sure I would have made it through grad school. And Agatha Christie, I had not read any of those. And I just loved them. Loved them.
What was the first then mystery that really kind of hooked you?
It might be The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tay. I've always been very interested in history, and this is her sleuth. It's in the 1930s, I think. Her sleuth is laid up in the hospital with a broken leg for weeks, and other people bring him, grapes and flowers. But this one friend of his brings him paintings of portraits. And he's looking at them, and he is assessing who they are by just the portrait. And then he checks against who they are as the historical figure. And he gets all of them right, except for Richard III. He goes back, and he treats the case of whether Richard III killed the princes in the tower or not as he would if it were a case that came to him in then modern day 1930s. And I loved it. I thought it was fascinating, and it combined two things.
Well, it's a neat concept, too.
Isn't it great?
And unsolved.
It combines those two things that you're not interested. It questions the sources, because a lot of what we know about Richard III comes from Shakespeare, who, had employment from one side of the argument. And it's a fascinating book.
So then, okay, so you after writing your first mystery, I guess it's kind of like, is it what you thought it would be?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yes, in some ways, in a lot of ways, it is what I thought it would be. The current mystery series is first person, and I have a lot of friends who say they hear my voice and that it's more my voice than any of my other books. Oddly, there's a fair amount of smart-ass humor in it. No idea where that came from. No, out of the blue. What's interesting to me is the process too of because you have the story arc, you have the story question within each book, and then you for me I also have the character arc that I see it changing across the series. And one of the reactions I've gotten from a few readers, most of them have been extremely positive, but a few readers have complained that the sleuth, Elizabeth Margaret Danaher, hasn't moved on emotionally from things that happened in her life previously, and hasn't decided between two men. And I keep looking at this thinking, wait a minute, she's been divorced for less than a year. She's known these two guys for less than 8 months. She's not really dating either one, and yet people want her to make a decision. And I'm thinking, no, she needs more time.
So is that hard to do when you're looking at a long-term arc across a series? Or does that organically happen where you just start to notice changes between your novels?
Both.
Okay.
That's a twofer question. Because when I initially had the idea for the series, I had a view that she would change. I didn't know how she would change. I knew that she would resolve some questions, but I did not, and in a lot of instances still do not know how those questions are going to be resolved. And yes, there are two guys, and I'm not sure which one. We'll have to wait for Elizabeth to tell us, and for them, for the two guys too, to tell us. So then within the story, I often find things coming up that surprise me, and almost invariably make the next story more complicated. So, because you keep adding threads, and pretty soon you have like a factory full of yarn because of all these threads, and you have to keep bringing them back into one coherent whole in each book. So
right, because it's changing your process.
Yes,
because you're already starting with something in the past.
Yes,
you haven't.
Yep.
Is that, and you mentioned this a little bit about writing in first person. Is that difficult, or like you were saying, you're able to kind of, some character comes through, or
one of the things I enjoy about it for the mystery is that it makes it easier for me as a writer to hide some things from the reader, because you only know what Elizabeth knows. If you're writing in third person, and I'm looking at doing another mystery series, and I'm debating right now whether to do first or third. If you're writing in third person, you're going to have usually different points of view, multiple points of view characters. And the more point of view characters you have in a mystery, the more information the reader is going to have. And then it becomes the issue of the reader knows this, and they're thinking the sleuth is kind of stupid not to know it. So I'm debating. I'm not sure what I want to do.
So in first person, you're bringing them along with you.
Right. And that can be fairly limited because it's one person experiencing one track of the story. And that's all that the reader gets to know. What I love about it is if the reader connects with that character, you have a really close bond. Right. And I certainly do as the author, too. I have a close bond with that character.
And you mentioned this a little bit of, so when your readers make that connection, that close bond, so then that, I guess, impacts social media and people's connections. And
they have opinions on what the characters should do and how they should do it.
What is that kind of like, getting that feedback in the middle of not in the middle of your writing process, but you're, in the middle of an arc, and you're getting feedback from people about where things should go and your characters and.
Well, clearly I want to argue with them.
Right,
because I just did. It's interesting, but it also I have to keep in mind that it's a small minority.
Right.
Most of the readers are following along, and they're just fine with the pace. Yes, they want to know what's happening next, and they want the books faster. Which is such a lovely compliment. But I had one email exchange with a reader who was saying he didn't know what he was going to do because he was all his tendons were going from twiddling his thumbs waiting for the next book. And I wrote back and said, "Oh, the guilt. I can't write because of the guilt."
It's overwhelming, right?
Yeah. And he wrote back and said, "Okay, I got it. No more guilt trips. But when's the next book out?"
Well, that is interesting though, where you're getting that feedback and
yes.
you're on that. Now, to take it back, you're writing back farther. So,
okay,
how was the transition from going from a working journalist to writing fiction?
Well, I did both of them for a long time. And
was that hard, or was it just something you were comfortable with, or
it was difficult in a technical standpoint. From a journalist, you tend to tell. You want to get the point across as succinctly as possible. So you say, he was angry. In fiction, you want the reader to come to that conclusion. So you show. It is not nearly as efficient. And it took me a while to get over, let's say this in the fewest words possible. Right. He was angry. And to start to show more readily, to let the reader put together the pieces and realize the emotion. But when you do that, the reader's part of the story. All reading is interactive, which that was also a jolt because I thought I was ruling the universe with my fiction. But each reader takes something different from what I put out there or what any author puts out there. So it's always interactive. And if you show, then the reader is very much involved in that story and determining what is brought out of that story. So that was a big thing for me, the show versus tell.
Well, I think that'd be really hard, as in, I just want you to know he's angry, and then,
yeah.
or I'm going to spend 250 words so
Yeah.
So you're implying on that. So that is a different, it's almost it's just a different mindset, or just a different way.
So.
It's like going from writing novels to Twitter. I mean, you're kind of your transition. So I think personally that'd be very hard on that part of it, of your writings. I mean, at that point,
yes.
Making that transition.
But one of the things I did, I was working full-time at the Washington Post and as an editor and copy chief in the sports department, which meant I worked nights mostly. So I would write fiction during the day. And if I was tired, I was tired for work. But it was two separate segments of my days. And that helped somewhat too, although I got to the point I was so tired because I was writing full-time and I was working more than full-time, and I was calling coworkers by character names, and I would get in the car, and it didn't matter where I meant to go, I ended up at the Post. So I thought, this is not good. And then I went part-time, but I continued to work. I was at the Post overall for 23 years.
Now, when you so you left that to write full time.
Yes.
Did you miss that part though? The culture that's a newspaper, a working desk and stuff going on. Did you miss that, or were you at that point where you're like, this is next for me. This is what I need to be doing.
I miss the people.
Yeah.
I miss some things about Washington. I know there's a lot of griping about it, but there's an excitement there, a level of energy that I really enjoyed. It's a beautiful city. I really like driving into work most days. Sometimes the traffic got me, but most days. But I don't think that I have had a single day since I left when I woke up and thought, gee, I wish I had to go to work at the Post today. It was exciting. It was good in a lot of ways, but it was also a job.
It was time.
Yeah.
How many years did you do that for?
To do both
Yeah, to do both, but also to be in Washington D.C. area.
I was in D.C. for 23 years.
Okay, so that's a lot of time, and it's a habit.
Yeah, and if you asked me how many years I did both, I'd have to really do math. So
Oh,
don't make me do that.
I'm deadly afraid of math, so I'll never ask that of anyone.
I was really interested in psychology in college until I learned you had to do statistics. And never mind. I believe that's, so I do my psychology in the books.
it's the only math I ever passed. Yeah, so I understand that. Okay, so let's take it back a little bit, and since you're able to talk to a lot of authors and you it's your career, could you explain a little bit kind of like how you see right now, and it changes every single day, but the publishing world and the process for people who are trying to get themselves published or even self-published, and you mentioned some of the different routes people are going. I think it probably becomes a preference or what they're comfortable with, but just kind of what you're seeing out there right now.
It's a fascinating time. It's been a fascinating time for several years. So I was initially traditionally published. I had 27 books, I think, and traditionally published. And the sea change that the industry has gone through with the advent of digital books, which then opened the door to indie books, has been amazing. Most of the time, all the time that I was in traditional publishing, the power was all with the editors and to an extent with the agents. And the authors were often petitioners. Please consider my lowly work. That's changed, and not so much in traditional. That's still there to a great extent in the traditional publishing. But because of indie, you can go directly to the reader. You don't have to have those middle people of the editor and the agent. And that is huge. That makes the reader much more powerful, because what traditional has always done is try to guess what the reader wanted. And that was often an educated guess, but often wrong, or every book would be a bestseller that they put out. So you have now this situation where authors have choices. You don't have to be indie. You can, if a great contract is offered to you, a good situation from a traditional publisher, if you can go that route, you can do both. A lot of people, that's why I referred to as hybrid. A lot of authors are balancing the two so that they still have control of these books here, but the traditional publisher is reaching a different audience from the audience they can reach with these books. For someone just starting out, I think they need to recognize the pluses and minuses on both sides. The good news about indie publishing is you have control. You have control over everything. The bad news is you then have to exercise that control. You have to do all the work. And it's a lot of work. Traditional publishing, for one thing, they're taking all the rights. You have to be prepared to not ever have the rights back to that story as long as you live, or at least 35 years, depending on some legal stuff that's going through the system. And you do not have control. You do not have control over the cover. You do not have control over the schedule. You do not have control over marketing. You do not have control over placement in the stores, which genre it's going to be in. You don't have control. Now, if traditional publishing works for somebody, if they win that lottery and they become a brand name, a household name, it's a terrific situation. And I have some friends who are in that position, and more power to them. It's not without its flaws, even when it's a great situation for the author. But it depends on what somebody wants and what they're willing to do. I think if you are published traditionally or indie, you have to be prepared to do your own marketing. The traditional publishers are not marketing for authors except for those household names.
So you said you had 27 published, I guess, under the traditional.
Yes.
And so was it hard on their 28th not to, or was it kind of an exciting, you're kind of like, I see what's ahead of me and this is what I want to take on. This is the challenge I'm looking at.
Well, I was hybrid for
Okay.
a while. So I had that intermediate stage, but it wasn't hard. I'm past president of an organization called Novelists, Inc., which is international group of multi-published popular fiction authors. So you had to have a certain number of books out. For most of the time, we were all traditionally published. Now there is a way to come in as an indie author as well. In 2007, I was the president, and we had a conference out in San Diego, and Chris Anderson, who was then the editor of Wired magazine, came down and spoke to us, and he is also the author of The Long Tail and Free, and now he's involved with TED Talks. And he stood in front of this room full of traditionally published authors and said, "Publishing as you know it is dead." And you could kind of hear the... And my question was, what's going to replace it? And he said he had no idea, but something would, and we should look at music and the music industry. And that was a little disheartening because, as many people are probably now aware, the musical artists are not receiving much compensation in the model they're in now. They do on concerts, but if you try to overlay that for authors, I don't know how many people are going to come out in tens of thousands to hear us read our books aloud. I just don't see that happening. So we were all, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? But what that did was open my eyes to the possibilities when things started happening. So I started a website with some other authors in 2009 where we were selling direct to readers. And then when iBooks and Barnes & Noble Nook and then Kindle came in offering 70% royalty, that when you sell a book in a certain price category, you get 70%. I started publishing there in 2010. And I was doing that with books that I had the rights back to, earlier books. But I was still traditionally publishing. I was in the traditional publishing with the mysteries. So I was more of, I was more delighted.
Okay,
I was part of the group going, oh yeah, let's do this.
So you got ahead of it. I mean, you saw, you're told, hey, this is where it's going.
Thanks to Chris Anderson.
Yeah,
Thank you, Chris Anderson.
And that is a really interesting that book. I've read the Long Tail because it's an interesting concept of that. You could sell 4 copies between now and forever. It wouldn't be just like a set thing. And so kind of, I guess, changing a mindset.
It's a totally different mindset. And it's hard sometimes still to not get into the mindset of traditional publishing where it's about volume in a narrow time. So, which is what all the bestseller lists are focused to. Even the list like USA Today, which is actually based on sales. Now, the New York Times list is not strictly based on sales. They vet the list and which books will be considered and which ones will be on and not. So I think people should be aware of that. The New York Times list in particular is not really truly a bestseller list. But even the ones like USA Today and Wall Street Journal, where it is based on sales, it is sales within a week, one span of time. And yet I can look at, I've been on the USA Today list, I think it's 6 times, and I can look at the books that were on that list versus other books, and other books of mine have sold many more copies. But those particular books that were on the list had the velocity in that specific time period.
So it was just timed right, and it just...
Yeah, and how important is that really to a reader? I think it's more telling how many books you've sold over the span of time. Maybe we should do books per week over a year lists. they give a truer view of which books are drawing readers and the readers are enjoying.
And then it's kind of tying in a little bit of that and also now with social media and your marketing of yourself, you're also getting that feedback too from your readers.
Oh, yes.
Of what they're reading, of what they want and what's out there too. So you're marketing yourself, you're learning, you're kind of going from that process too.
But you get to market at home in your pajamas.
Much better.
Instead of having to go out in public.
So much better.
It is. It's great.
I'd like to talk a little bit about just kind of some experiences you've had with public libraries.
Oh, I love libraries. I will say the main library here, when I saw that when I was looking at houses around in the area, I thought, yeah, okay. This is good.
It's a reason to move to an area.
Yeah, you are my local library, my very local library. My very first paying job other than babysitting was at a library. The Helen M. Plum Memorial Library in Lombard, Illinois. And I was a page.
Nice.
So I used to be able to do the alphabet backwards from shelving all the books. Yeah, I loved it.
I would be the world's worst shelver. So I a page. I am. So I'm already in awe of what you're doing. So you have
to be an executive, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. My skills are so limited. They're going to keep bumping me up. It's funny. I volunteer once a week at my daughter at her school library, and it takes me forever to get one cart down. So I could not do what they do out here. So that was your first job?
That was my very first job. Yep.
That is awesome. And how long did you do that for?
About a year and a half, I think. It was in high school.
Yeah.
Early in high school. Yep.
That's impressive. Yeah. So.
And I always used to go to the library because pre-internet days.
Yeah.
It was the card catalog was the holy grail to find the things you needed. But do you predate the internet?
I do.
Okay.
I do, yeah.
So do you remember going into the library and it was like a treasure hunt because you start from the card catalog and you go to find a book and that gave you some stuff, but it wasn't really what you wanted. And then when you went back and found the sources on that book and there was a first person source, there was a primary source there, and you could go and find that.
Well, I remember thinking, and you'd go in the library, and my first library experience memory is this old Carnegie, and so I'd start off at the circ desk, with a question. Of course, I knew no difference between circulation and reference, so I would take my question to the circ desk, and every now and then they would send me to reference. And that felt like that was a big deal. Like when I was old enough to get a reference question, like 4th or 5th grade, I was like, wow, could you talk to that gentleman over there? Like, ooh. And I'd sent across the library, which is probably only like 25 steps, but it was like this long mile that I was taking to go talk to get the answers and what a big deal and stuff like that. And, so yes, I do remember that.
I have to tell you the story at the Helen M. Plum Memorial Library. It was initially the home of Helen M. Plum and Colonel Plum.
Get out.
Colonel Plum, and yes.
The Colonel Plum?
Well, our Colonel Plum in Lombard. They had a collection of lilacs and around their house, and when they died, they had no children. They donated the grounds and their house to the town. So the house was turned into a library, and it was this old white kind of Victorian.
Yeah.
It was at least 2 stories. No, it must have been 3 stories. And then now it's Lilacia Park. And so when I was a little kid, you went to the old Plum house was the library, and the steps were worn as you went up, and you walked in the front door and there were steps upstairs, but that was to the adult section.
Ooh.
And you didn't get to go to the adult section. And the kids was just to the right, and walking, it must have been the parlor. And I can remember reading all those books. They were biographies of famous people, but they were their childhoods, and they had profiles. Do you remember those? They were. They had a specific. I read every single one of them. Actually, I believe I read all the books in the kids section. My sister, who's significantly older than I am then, started taking books out for me. And one of the librarians realized what she was doing and said, "Oh, you shouldn't do that." My sister said, she's read them all. What are you going to do?
So you're a nonfiction reader?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I read a lot of those. Loved them, and also fiction. I read them all.
So, what is, going back, a biography you remember that you read that just sticks out in your mind?
Oh, I love the founding fathers. I was really interested in colonial America and the Revolution. Was fascinated by the idea of these people making a new country and having these ideas and plans. And there was a while there where I knew all the genealogy of George Washington and how he connected to Robert E. Lee. Long gone now, but my older siblings would say, "Oh no, she's off again." She knows all these people.
There's something and it hasn't gone away, but so addictive where you can get lost at your library.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Especially, and it's interesting. I've had some great conversations with the people here who work like local history, and when they get into, they really get passionate about genealogy and really fired up, and it's such a rabbit hole. It's kind of hard to explain.
Truly, and it's a series of rabbit holes. One rabbit hole leads to another rabbit hole, leads to which people I think experience too. I do on the internet, where you suddenly I'll have 27 tabs open on the browser.
I got to stay away from Wikipedia. It is an unhealthy addiction. I was reading about the Holy Roman Empire today. I just felt that it was really important. I knew that. This is really important right now.
But then do you go back and check their sources?
No, I haven't gotten that bad. I take,
That's not bad.
I haven't got that dead.
Wait a minute, that's not bad.
And that ties in. Okay, that ties into something you were mentioning to me too. We were talking a little bit about when you're doing your research and digging.
Yes.
So if you talk a little bit, because this sounds like digging right here.
It does.
Digging on sources, which is great, which is always good to back up sources. Tell a little bit about that. A little bit of how you're.
Well, I love research. I try to. It depends on what I'm writing. I've written a couple of historicals. Not set in colonial America. Oh no, that would have been too easy because I knew that. Mine are set in Wyoming in like the 1870s, 1880s. So I had to start fresh. Oh, gee, have to do all this research.
Okay, well, we're talking about research and digging in, but you're talking about Wyoming. Did you go out to Wyoming then for your research?
Yes.
So boots on the ground always help?
I actually had already been there.
Okay.
And I had a free airline ticket that I had suffered for greatly. And so I wanted to go someplace expensive to fly that I didn't think I would go to otherwise. And that I didn't think a writing conference would take me to, and that I had never been to before. So it ended up being Wyoming. I flew into Sheridan, Wyoming.
Okay.
Because the rental cars were cheaper. And I rented a car and I just drove around and I was fascinated. It was so different from a lot of what I've experienced and what at that point what I'd seen of the country. It just fascinated me. I went to Yellowstone. I got to know a guy who has a family ranch who is a great resource for me now. Usually after he stops laughing at my questions. And so I've been back, I don't know, 8 times, 9 times, something like that.
So do you visit the same ranch?
I usually visit him, not every time, but yes. Yeah, I see his ranch, and I've been around Sheridan, that's the eastern slope of the Bighorn Mountains, Sheridan, Buffalo, which was kind of the origins of the Virginian.
Okay,
book. Yeah. And Cody, which is then kind of the entry to Yellowstone Park, and have been through, and the Bighorn Basin in between the Bighorns and the Rockies, been in there, and then up into Montana a little bit. Done some really interesting things, whitewater rafting and wild horse roundups, and, getting live. But one of my favorite stories, we were trying to go to the Battle of Little Bighorn, but we decided to take the back roads, and we got thoroughly lost. We were trying to find Decker, Montana, and apparently we'd gone through it 3 times, not realizing we'd gone through it. So we come out, and I was the designated question asker, and we saw this guy working on a combine, so I went up to him, and I said, we're lost. And he looked at me and said, hard to get lost. There's only one road around here. But when you don't know where the road is going, you are lost. So we finally got to the Battle of Little Bighorn.
So have you done your research before you'd gone, or did you go to the location?
No,
or
I had going to Wyoming is what started me being interested in writing stories there.
Okay.
And so that was what triggered the interest. And I write both contemporaries, and I've written a few historicals there. The mysteries are set in Wyoming. And sometimes I go back and look for specific things, but more often I'm going just for the feel of it and to talk to people and look and enjoy it. It's wonderful.
So it comes through in your writing then? Those experiences
yes,
you're having,
absolutely.
And what you pick up on, and
absolutely.
It's really exciting.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Well, what are you working on now?
I'm finishing up a project with some other authors, and then I have to make up my mind, which is always hard. And I will often start working on multiple things. So I may start working on the next book in my mystery series, which is Caught Dead in Wyoming series, and the next book is Cold Open. And I know kind of the gist of the story, and this is typical of my process. I also know some of the book after that. And that's the one I really want to write. I don't want to write the one I'm supposed to be working on. That next one looks shinier and brighter and a lot more fun. So I've got to curb that a little bit. And I have an idea for another mystery series, and I'm playing around with that. It's too early to say too much about it.
So do you prefer series compared to
I
one-offs?
do, because I love revisiting the characters. I love seeing how they're advancing, and when I do series and mysteries, each book focuses on a different couple, but the couple from a previous book or several previous books will also show up, and I kind of like to have those updates, those catch-ups with it's reunion time. So
well, and
I love that.
we try kind of our conversation too about what people like, and I think people prefer that too. Though we like these characters, we like it's kind of even like how I feel like how our attitudes towards watching TV's change. Now I'm getting through a series. I'm watching season 1. It's almost taken on reading, right? Like this intimacy that people have. But I think it's the same thing with your writing, is people want. And
the sense of community.
Yeah, they want. They read one. They want to know more about this, whoever this person is. The second, third, fourth. It's
one of the things that delights me the most when a review will say that they feel like these people are people they know and that they're friends, and they hate to have it end.
Right.
Yes, that's how I feel too as the author. That these are people I would like to know.
So
because I do know.
And because I may have missed the point, are you working on a brand new series, or is this a continuation that?
I will be continuing Caught Dead in Wyoming.
Okay.
Definitely. And then, yes, I'm thinking about an additional series. But I'm not sure yet. And then there are a couple of romances I want to do, and there may be a Christmas novella. And usually my problem is that my ideas outstrip my year. So I can't get as many books in as I would like to.
So is it I guess is like, I don't know, probably word this wrong, but is romance the genre you're most comfortable with, or is it kind of like your home genre, or?
It's my home genre, and that's where I've written the most books.
Right.
And I do love them. As I said, my background came from classical, and when I started reading the top romance books, it was like, okay, this is why I liked peace and War and Peace. War was like, oh yeah, fine, they're in another battle. Let's go.
Yeah.
I want to get back to the relationships. I want to get back to the people and what makes them tick and how they interact. And so to me, that is what romance really focuses on. And I like that. It's fun. It's community.
But are you able to take that what you're talking about, the relationships, and bring that through to your mysteries?
Yes.
So it's a good foundation to have, these interpersonal.
Absolutely.
Working in and out.
Absolutely. If you can't write characters, you're not going to be able to write a romance. You have to have that really strong foundation, and that writing those characters is what lets the reader connect to it. I tend to think of books as journey books, or destination books. And the destination books, can say it maybe in movies better. Sixth Sense, that was a destination movie.
Right.
You saw it. How many times are you going to re-see it?
Right.
Very many. Where you could we've just had the holidays, so you can look at It's a Wonderful Life. That's a journey movie. You love the journey. You love the characters. You will go with them time after time after time. So I like reading and I like writing journey stories.
Makes sense. Bring them back. Yeah, bring them back.
So how do you see the library changing?
Oh, wow. We think about that a lot, actually,
Yeah.
changing. I would say that part of it, I don't think it ever will. I think kind of like we're talking about, the same thing with characters and the same thing as place and bringing people together in that community. I don't think we're going to change at all as far as that. I think we're going to get better at encouraging it and better at having nicer chairs and better at, I think, that center, that hub of your community. I don't think we're going to change at all on that. Now, I guess technology, and I guess that there's this feeling at first of this impersonal, we could all get beamed whatever we want to read, and we don't have that, but there's still that tactile, and we're seeing that more and more. There's still that desire. And of course, as far as us as librarians, if you want something, we want you to have it. Like that's how we live. We want you to have that.
I love interlibrary loans.
Yeah, and start having that, that scarcity of resources where we can't provide it this very second. I think that it bothers us. We want you to have, kind of like we're talking about, being popular and getting what you want and what people want to read and stuff like that. So that's always kind of that technological frustration. But I'm curious to see, in 50 years from now, if all of a sudden it's going to be a big deal again if you have your own books. If we'll go to extreme, because people are still buying LPs,
like vinyl.
Yeah, people still, because there's that intimacy and there's that relationship, and I don't think that's going to go away. I just think we're going to keep navigating it. And as far as that, and I also think too I think we're going to get better at working on our own content, even like this conversation today. Bringing people together and creating this content and creating really great programs and creating different ways for people to have this experience with the library. But I always think of when people come into the library, even if you can self-check and you can do it all, people always kind of want that connection, and that if you're reading something you're really excited about, you're going to tell somebody. Yeah. You're going to find somebody you want to talk to. And a lot of times, who are great people at that as librabarians, people who work at the desk who have that same enthusiasm. Absolutely. Even if it's a book you don't know, it's like, there's a lot of times people would say a book I've never heard of by an author, but that enthusiasm comes through. It's like, well, now I want to hear. Now tell me, why is this a good book? And I don't think that's going to change either. I think that's really exciting. What we do. I
also hope that that sense of wonder that I had when I walked into the Helen M. Plum Memorial Library and turned into the kids' room, and there was this entire room with possibility.
Right.
All these possibilities of books and stories and people and the past and the future and the present, and I can clearly still feel that. Yeah. That memory is so vivid. And I hope the libraries continue to give that to people, I definitely,
exactly. That same, what brought us in. Yeah. That same vibe. I don't think that's going away, and it's great to see, But I do think we're getting smarter at capturing what that is, and thinking more about collections and what should we have, and I think there is more to make it scary. There's more math. There's more statistics involved. There's more, looking at stuff like that. But having said that, there's a lot of stuff that isn't, like we're talking about, isn't on the bestseller list that people are going to pick out, and it'll mean a lot to them.
Well, and that's one of the things that we may be off track here. You may have to, but that's one of the things that really fascinates me for the future. Discoverability of books, and that's a big issue for authors and publishing in general. How do you find the next book that someone will enjoy? I don't know about you, but I find that the recommendations are not there. They're not. Right. They're not hitting the mark by any means. And I tend to think that it's because the metadata is largely clunky. It's looking at things like what color hair the protagonist had, or what their job was, or something. And that's not what a reader reacts to. A reader, this reader anyhow, I react to how it made me feel. And how it made me feel might not be how I want to feel with the next book, but maybe 3 books down the road, I want to come back to this feeling. And there's got to be a way. And I'm banking on quantum computing.
Right,
It's got so much power that it, together with artificial intelligence, can start getting to this sense of how did that make you feel? And this book, which is in a different genre or has a different background or location, is likely to make you feel that way. But again, because reading is so interactive, it's going to have to be really individualized, or now it is not. It's still genre and big categories.
I understand what you're saying. I think we get, and I just mean this generically, too caught up in genre, because it's like it's kind of like what you're talking about, characters. If you have a good story about good characters, and it doesn't matter what it is, I'm going to read it. Like it. Don't let the romance, Western, whatever, that's not the story. The story, these people, you take an interest in these people and stuff like that.
But because libraries still have to deal with the physical shelving,
yeah,
you have to have, or do you have to have? Would you lose readers by having all the books just kind of shelved together? And
oh yeah, there's been some library systems who've done more like the Barnes and Noble, and this was like a big, too big to do. And it's also interesting too, kind of tying into our conversation about our own collection too, because there's so many authors who do series now, and it's hard for us because it's like this author's got 27 books in the series, and we don't have number 8, and it's how when we're managing
library law.
Yeah, we're managing a physical collection and tying that all in. And I do think that's. We kind of struggle with that. That's kind of it's a hard thing, of those spaces, which is interesting too, because we're building smaller, and our physical spaces are smaller, and they're really well thought out library physical spaces. In the past,
multifunctional.
In the past, we'd have the shelving units, and you'd put them down there, and 5 years from now, maybe you'd move some out. But now we take it as a retail, that space, and how we're using that space. But that space can be meant for a lot of different things. So it is kind of. And I think you're right. There's always interlibrary loan. All else fails, we've got ILL. And that is a nice thing to say, but we also want it now, which is exciting too. I think, kind of tying all into what you're talking about, I think the hardest thing or the most interesting thing, science, will be from trying to deal with the sadness of when you finished a book, when you're in those characters. How do I get rid of that? That's hard. That is really hard.
From my podcast, one of the reader questions was to the authors: do you think about the characters when you finish the book? Because the reader obviously did. And does it ever lead to additional books? And for me, it almost always does, because I keep coming back and revisiting them. And I miss them. And
to me, that's so interesting, like in comparison. This is, of course, the first comparison I can think of is like an Elmore Leonard, who was based on the story. It's his characters, but it's not his characters, if that makes any sense. You're not going to read a 3rd or 4th or 5th book. You're in, and then the story's over, compared to, your relationship-based writing. You're vested. You're vested for 6, 7, 8, which is just kind of interesting to me on that one, because it's like, if you get used to one style and you're like, I can't go back to this. I need more. I need the backstory. I need the,
But it depends on the reader. Other readers like that one, to have that finite world, to have it closed.
Right.
They don't want it to extend.
Yeah.
So it just depends on that reader. And that's the issue too, I think, with the shelving, where I was saying maybe you put all the books in one big thing. You're going to lose browsers who say, oh, I want a mystery, and they'll browse through the mystery section.
Yeah. It is interesting too, because it's like, do readers vest themselves as, well, I'm only a romance novel? I don't think they look at themselves like that. They're following the story. So it
depends.
That's
on
true.
The genre.
Yeah.
Romance readers in particular are very eclectic. They read a lot, and they will read outside of genre. Mystery readers are more focused toward mystery. I'm not as familiar. Science fiction readers are more focused toward their genre, so they aren't as broad. Western readers, my experience is that they will dabble in and out as long as it's set in the West.
Okay,
they like that world.
Right.
what other genre? Horror readers. Probably more dabbling because there isn't as much of it, but they will dabble around.
Yeah.
More. But the romance readers, they are avid. Love them.
You say you got a loyal group.
Oh, yes. Terrific. And the mystery readers have been terrific, too. I've been
Good.
really pleased. Lots of men. Yeah.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense in mystery. Well, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much.
I think we covered a couple topics.
Thank you for having this wonderful, beautiful library. I enjoy
very fortunate. We're very fortunate.
And, I appreciate coming in.
Well, thanks
incognito, because I often come in looking like a bag lady.
Hey, people know who you were. The staff knows stuff. Like, she comes in, she's great. No, they're nothing but praise. It was really nice.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Please follow the links for more information. Information on Patricia McLinn can be found on patriciamclinn.com. And there is a video of this podcast which can be found on BCPL YouTube channel. I'm Sean Fry. Thank you for joining us on Innovators and Creators.